All right, well, London Mayor Sadiq Khan recently said that the terror attacks are part and parcel now for big cities. Former UK Independence Party leader Nigel Farage says that kind of thinking is a mistake. In other words, what he is saying, Nigel, is that you got to deal with it. It's just life in big cities. What did you make of that and the message it sends?
Well, I think there's a bit of a trend here, because just 2 days after that horrendous lorry attack that took place in Nice back on July the 14th, 2 days afterwards, the French Prime Minister Manuel Valls said that this is a part of life in modern-day France. So Valls says it in Nice. Sadiq Khan says that it applies to big cities. I mean, you may as well just put up the white flag of surrender to say, we're just going to normalise terrorism. And what makes me really annoyed is it's the very same political class who have, whenever anybody has questioned open-door immigration, whenever anybody says, look, surely we should security check people, we should make sure that newcomers into our country agree with our values, gets condemned. And what I'd like to see from the French Prime Minister and from Sadiq Khan, before they say anything, is an apology for what their policies and their ideas have done to all of us.
But, Nigel, this does seem to be a growing sentiment among political leaders who say, we acknowledge terror and the threat, but don't make too big a deal of it. John Kerry, our Secretary of State, recently saying that he wished the media wouldn't constantly cover it, words to that effect. We've even, heard those who are on the other side of the aisle, including first Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge, saying more people are killed in car crashes and all that than what happened with terrorists. All true. But I think they minimize the threat when they minimize the numbers and compare them to other numbers. What do you think?
Well, that's right. And I mean, Bill de Blasio, is still in denial, it seems to me, about what happened in New York last week. Every time we get one of these horrendous incidents, more in Europe than America, but wherever they take place, immediately this same clique of people rush to say, of course, it's got nothing to do with terror. It's certainly got nothing to do with religion. This is just kind of, just get on with it, guys. This is part of our everyday life. And they're in denial. They cannot admit to the people the extent of their failure, and they don't want to have an open, honest debate about how we deal with this.
All right. Now, an open, honest debate, Donald Trump says, would be to recognize a war on terror, an actual war. He has said if he became president, he'd get a plan from his top generals within 30 days to take out ISIS once and for all. Is that even possible now, given the fact that ISIS and these other terror groups seem so widespread, they almost don't need a homeland. They're everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, look, the fact that Trump is talking about borders, is talking about security, is saying that the US government has a responsibility to its own citizens, all of that is absolutely right, and I think may well win him this presidential election. But when it comes to taking out ISIS, that's not so simple. There isn't just sort of one command center. In fact, in many ways, ISIS is a little bit like the multi-headed Hydra. There are lots of little bits of ISIS all over the place. I am yet to be convinced that there is a military means to simply take out ISIS unless we're prepared to accept that we work with Middle Eastern and North African governments and fight a campaign that may last for 10 or 20 years. But we can't do it. America and Britain on their own cannot do this without possibly stoking up more young generations to move towards the ISIS cause. We've got to get those countries and those armies involved as well.
There's still some debate, as you and I are speaking, Nigel, about Seattle, or north of Seattle, Washington State, a mall attack that involved 5 deaths. A gentleman behind that, but we're told of Hispanic descent, and as if people were bending over backwards not to say Middle Eastern descent. Now, they may be proven right, I have no idea, but there's a real reluctance to attach anything that looks like this could be something bigger than it first appears. And I understand that you don't want to jump to conclusions, but the knee-jerk reaction, invariably, just as it was last week in New York, don't call it, a terrorist event.
Yeah, this is denial, and we see a political class in denial. We see quite large sections of the liberal media equally in denial. And of course, you know, what they fear is if they admit the truth and if they admit their failings, that Trump will get even stronger in this campaign. So whatever happens between now and November the 8th, expect these people to go on denying. And Hillary, top of the tree for that.
We shall see. Probably will come up once or twice in the debate. Nigel Farage, thank you very much.
Lying on the ground with canisters attached to this suspect, alleged suspect's torso. So still, from what we can gather, more than 3 hours after this incident unfolded, it still is an active incident with 2 crime scenes, one at Borough Market, which is just around the corner from where I am, the other at London Bridge, which is again a short distance away from Borough Market itself, and all of the time we are told that more resources are arriving here. They just sporadically sort of clear us out of the way, just on occasions to allow these vehicles to go through. And as you can see, these are public order officers, reinforcements that have been brought in probably from other London boroughs. Some of those officers that we saw earlier, public order trained officers wearing their protective helmets and carrying shields, as they were clearly involved in an active hunt for suspects who we are told had knives on them. And I'll be speaking in a second to my colleague Sarah Hadjibagari, who has been speaking to some eyewitnesses around here in the immediate aftermath. She's been gaining some information about what she's been able to find out. Sarah, what is the latest as far as you're concerned from what you've been able to find out?
Well, a lot of people very distraught in this area. We're currently on Southwark Street. You'll see the Shard in the background. We're very close to the London Bridge, which is just behind us. The cordon, however, has continued to expand. I've just tried to walk part of the circumference to try and talk to people. A lot of people in a lot of distress. We are now 3 hours on from when we understand this incident did take place.
And a lot of people still here, Sarah. Either they've decided to stick around and have a look, or they just can't get home.
Indeed, there's a hotel just around the corner. I've just went through to try and speak to people, see if there are any witnesses. A lot of people in distress, crying, and very emotional, because obviously we've seen the events that have just took place in Manchester. We've heard a lot of police activity. Even in the past hour, we're still seeing huge amounts of ambulances coming through and police cars, and I think there's a general fraught tension in central London. A lot of the streets closed off, and this part of central London has really kind of come to a standstill.
As you mentioned, that hotel nearby, bars as well, actually offering people just a chance to shelter in place, to just take some refuge, to gather their thoughts, wait until things calm down a bit. Even people locally around here, I noticed that Lord Paddock, former Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police at the time of the 7/7 bombings, he lives around here. He's been tweeting out to people, inviting them, if they want somewhere to stay for the meantime, to come up to his. So some real acts of kindness that you often see when these incidents unfold as well.
Very much so, but also a definite sense of tension. So I went into a second hotel. A huge group of us, there's a nightclub that was just down the road there, have just gone into that hotel, people trying to get taxis and things, and one woman just said, check people's bags, and suddenly there was a security guard there and wasn't letting anyone in without checking people's bags. So there's definitely a sense of tension. A lot of people still not knowing whether there's anyone on the scene that the police are still looking for. Very much, as you can see from behind us, it's an ongoing police incident, and a lot of police down here.
Okay, Sarah, for the moment, thanks again. I know you're going off to find some more information for us, but that scene of tension that Sarah talks about is absolutely evident around here. We see just occasionally police pulling people to the side. They've made 1 or 2 arrests just further up the street here. These arrests are often just out of an abundance of caution. People that they want to, if you like, in that old terminology that the police use, eliminate them from their inquiries. I'm just hearing more sounds of explosions just a bit further up the street there, probably a bit too far in the distance for you to make out, but as I'm just going to pop to the side because some more police reinforcements are coming through and heading up now towards that area, up towards Borough Market and London Bridge, the scene of what was another sound of a blast there. As I say, my guess is, rather than controlled explosions which are being carried out by bomb disposal teams, that it sounds more like the kind of distraction devices, stun grenades that the police use when they're pushing forward to try to confront armed suspects. And we know in terms of these suspects that they were armed at the very least with very large knives. These horrific reports that have been emerging from more than one source about this white transit van that, after it careered into people across London Bridge and came to a halt at that point, the back doors opened and at least 3 people emerged from that van carrying these large knives and then began stabbing people, not just on London Bridge, but there was this other incident. We don't know if that was involving the same group of people or whether it was a different group of people, but that was also, we're told, involving a multiple stabbing incident where people were, at least one suspect, pushed forward into a restaurant. He was repelled back by customers in that restaurant bar area, throwing glasses and anything they could at them. The police arrived on scene as well. So still very active, the scene around London Bridge here, judging by the explosions that we can hear and the police activity that continues apace.
Mark, we'll let you try and investigate exactly what those noises are. We just managed to make them out on your microphone. We'll be back to you shortly. And let's just remind you, though, of the statement that the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has released in the last 15 minutes. He said this: the Metropolitan Police are responding to the, as he describes it, horrific terrorist attack at London Bridge and Borough Market. My thoughts are with everyone affected. I'd like to thank the brave men and women of our emergency services who were first on the scene and will be working throughout the night. He carries on. The situation is still unfolding, and I would ask all Londoners and visitors to our city to remain calm and vigilant. Please report anything suspicious to the police, but only call 999 in an emergency. He concludes thus: we don't yet know the full details, but this was a deliberate and cowardly attack on innocent Londoners and visitors to our city enjoying their Saturday night. I condemn it in the strongest possible terms. There is no justification, according to the Mayor of London, for such barbaric acts. We are not yet 4 hours from the first calls made from London Bridge to the emergency services, but already we have had a number of stories of strangers opening their doors to tourists caught up in events in and around Borough Market. We know of one pub which has opened its doors to the temporary residents of a hotel who've been evacuated with some concern for their safety. And of course, the lifeblood of London, the black taxi drivers, have also been telling their tales. We spoke with one earlier on who told us about passengers, 2 passengers caught up in events in and around Borough Market.
I picked up some passengers. There was 2 passengers. Apparently they came out of the Black and Blue restaurant, and how they described it to me was they were preventing the guys from getting into the restaurant. She actually knew that they were bad people, basically, and possibly
they tried to break in.
They tried to break in, absolutely. She managed to hold the door for a few seconds, but then I think they're overpowered, so they managed to escape from the rear door, possibly saving a good 20 people's lives, as they mentioned whilst I took them home.
They all managed to get out the back? They
managed to get out the back, and then that's when they came up to me. I took them to Strand.
How did they seem when you picked them up?
They were in, oh God, it was so difficult. They were in shock. Shock as if, you know, you can just judge by their face. It was just, she was almost in tears as well, both of them. They were just counting how many heads there were, how many staff there were left behind and making phone calls whilst en route home.
So obviously you had a very bad experience.
Yes, extremely bad experience, and they were very shaky as well, so I just calmed them down, as a black cab driver would do, and I got them safely home.
Thank you very much. That's Appreciate it. Cheers.
Thank you.
Could you just tell us how you spell your name?
We of course have not yet had any word from the London Ambulance Service or indeed from any of the hospitals to which the injured have been sent as to the nature and number of the casualties. But certainly it appears clear that if it hadn't been for the actions of both the police and some very brave members of the public, the situation in London this evening might have been rather worse. Understandably, initial focus was on the first incident to take place, that on London Bridge, where a vehicle said to be a white van came off the roads, came back onto the road, and in the process mowed down several people, causing, as far as we know, injuries, and perhaps, and the suspicion is, according to the reports coming in via social media, that those injuries may have been very serious indeed. But then, as we've been hearing throughout the evening, events in and around Borough Market, very close to London Bridge, on the south, very close to London Bridge, very popular area with locals and indeed with tourists. Our cameraman being told about men wielding knives. Another witness, Simon Thomas, spoke to our reporter as well.
Yeah, I was just outside Borough Market, and I just saw suddenly loads of people run away from the market, and there was people lying on the ground, and there was a taxi driver who had his sort of window down. He was really shouting at people to run. We ran for like 100 metres, and then sort of loads of police cars turned up, and there was kind of a period of quite intense gunfire. I hid in a restaurant basement for about an hour, and then we were down there for quite a while. The police told us to get out, and then there was more gunfire, I'd say, pretty much as soon as we left the building. So we've been down there for about another half an hour, and then they've just evacuated us now. So.
And what were the police telling you about what was happening, what the events were?
We didn't know. They didn't tell us anything. Well, they didn't. Well, they just said there'd been an incident. They didn't give us any details. But we could see on the CCTV there were people outside the restaurant on the ground.
And these were people who had been injured?
Yeah. The police just said there'd been casualties, so I don't know what extent of their injuries were.
And how did you feel? You didn't know what was happening?
Yeah, it was terrifying. Yeah. I don't know. Still in a state of shock, to be honest.
And we just saw the police escorting people coming out from that area with their hands, with your hands on your head. Why was that?
To be honest, I don't know if anyone actually told us to do that, but everyone else was doing it, so just kind of started doing it as well. But yeah, I'm not sure why. Sorry about that.
That's fine. And so when you were sort of the cab driver was initially saying what he had seen.
Yeah.
What were you seeing at that time?
Just saw people on the floor and then just ran. So, and just the wave of people running away, but didn't see anything else apart from that.
And are you able to say sort of how long after you had seen that cab driver, seeing people lying on the floor, did you start hearing gunfire? Can you sort of estimate how long that may have been?
5 minutes, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, but within that margin.
And how many people were crowding in this, you described being in a basement? How many people?
It was about 20 of us, about 20 people, yeah.
And were people sort of looking on their phones? How were you finding out what was happening? Yeah,
people were looking on the phones, but the news was a bit slow to kind of catch on. But yeah, people checked Twitter and rang relatives who then sort of checked on news websites, and it slowly came through.
And as you were coming out, what were you able to see? Because obviously now we're standing sort of about 10-15 minutes walk from where you were now. What were you seeing as you were coming through to this point?
Lots of kind of first aid kits and lots of medical kind of things. There were people on the ground previously, and apart from that, just lots of armed police and vans and that kind of thing.
And what exactly were the police saying to you as they're trying to get you out of the area?
They said they're looking for suspects across London, and that we potentially weren't safe where we were, and that we should move basically towards this Waterloo, which was the safer area.
And I imagine there were plenty of people around you, and yourself. You described yourself being in a state of shock now. Yeah,
pretty much, definitely.
And was it busy? Did it look like it was a busy normal Saturday night around?
It was very busy. Yeah, there was a lot of people. It's kind of hard to tell when people are moving, but yeah, it was certainly walking up to the station. It was very busy. There was, all sorts of people on nights out and that kind of thing.
And how did you? At what point did you realise that you sort of felt it was safe to leave the basement? Did the police sort of come down, ramp up by the?
The police basically had to tell us. They forced us out. Yeah.
So they came into the restaurant?
Yeah, and they said it was not safe to be there anymore.
Simon Thomas, just one of what one must assume have been thousands of people caught up in events in and around London Bridge last night. Police still in attendance in numbers in and around the area. We know that ambulances, fire service, police and armed police have all been drafted in. The Metropolitan Police have told us.
You are watching live Sky News coverage of this multiple scene terror attack. 3 separate scenes, 4 assailants at large, 1 person killed, shots fired. In fact, multiple people stabbed by these assailants who were driving that van eventually.
Not to mention a number of evacuations of people who were waking in their hotel rooms, children being told to leave the area. We're going to turn it over now to Judge Janine Pirro with Justice. She'll have more detail.
Breaking tonight, police in the UK confirm multiple acts of terrorism in London. Hello and welcome to Justice. I'm Judge Janine Pirro. Let's get right to that breaking news. As we've been reporting for the past several hours here, witnesses and police in London say a speeding van mowed down pedestrians on the London Bridge just after 10 p.m. London time tonight. That's about 4 hours ago. Witnesses there also reported seeing people stabbed on the bridge as well. There were also multiple stabbings at nearby Borough Market, also in London. No official word yet on the number of casualties or fatalities. British Prime Minister Theresa May is following developments in these incidents and says they are being treated as acts of terrorism. Here at home, President Trump has also been briefed on the attacks. He's tweeted a pledge to support the UK with anything they need. Joining me now by phone, Brad Myers, an eyewitness to the London Bridge attack. Good evening, Brad.
Hello, Judge.
All right, Brad, you were a witness. Where were you? What did you see? And you're an American, correct?
Yes, ma'am. I'm from Florida.
All right.
I was about halfway down the bridge on London Bridge at 10 p.m., almost exactly. I was taking pictures of the Tower Bridge, which is the picturesque bridge to the east. I decided to walk back towards the north of the bridge, walk down the stairs, and head toward a river walk, which is a nice little area you can walk down to get closer to the Tower Bridge. About 2 minutes later, after walking down those stairs, I heard a loud noise behind me and turned around to see the white van crashed into the guardrail, and it was continuing to go down the guardrail, hitting pedestrians. It heard it bump several different times as it swerved and continued to crash that way. Also saw a person jump from the bridge, presumably to get out of his path, and just immediately afterwards I came back up the stairs and looked. Everyone was standing in shock as to what had happened. Was it an accident? Was it terrorism? I immediately thought of the attack in Nice and saw several people on the ground on that north side of the bridge.
All right, let me just interrupt you for a moment, Brad. What we're seeing on the screen, I believe, is a photo that you took just before the incident of yourself?
Yes. Took a selfie right before.
The way we deal with this is a reactionary, paradigm.
Yes.
That what do we do now to prevent this kind? It's just going to keep happening.
I completely agree with that point, and that's why I'm saying that when you have the British security services saying publicly that they know of 23,000 jihadis in the UK, but that they are only tracking 3,000. That's 20,000 that they say that they know about, but they're not tracking. That says to me that the authorities have practically surrendered in this fight. And so when they come out with all their fine words and say, we're doing everything we can to keep people safe, it's not true.
Okay,
the fight against terror is not being fought with the full arsenal of the state. And I think people have every right to be angry.
Why are the people in the UK not up in arms? Why do we have two people running for prime minister, one who's even more left than the other, and the prime minister having been a home secretary in favor of, let them all in? What about Brexit?
It's a really good... It's a really good point. I mean, I just completely agree with you. I think that the first thing on Brexit is that in terms of the impact of that on immigration, you know, Brexit was voted for but hasn't yet been delivered. So that's going to take some time. But there's a real problem in the UK with this fight not being carried out fully. Let's go beyond immigration. There's another really important word beginning with I, and that is integration. There is a huge problem around the UK with many parts of the country where people they're just not integrated in the UK into UK society.
Okay, what do you mean by that, Steve? What do you mean not integrated?
That means you have Muslim communities around the UK. This was an official government report published in December, where huge proportions don't speak English, are not fully integrated, they are not part of mainstream culture. And that has been the result of decades of official policy of multiculturalism, which has said that you can come to the UK and you can carry on with the traditions and the values that are not part of what we all support in the UK. You don't have to learn English, you don't have to be part of mainstream society. But all of that contributes to the...
Steve, here's the bottom line. That sounds great, except the UK, your country, where you lived, is staying left. They're not doing anything about it. But now you're living in the States, Steve. Now, what do you think? Do you think this is coming here next? I mean, is this just a precursor of what's to come?
No, I think it's not. And I think that there's three reasons actually that give me confidence that we're in a much better position in America, although of course we have to be vigilant. The first is the whole idea of America. When people move to America, they come here because they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And the whole culture of America is of integrating people behind one idea that we're all citizens in one country.
Are you
and that is very strongly supported.
Are you saying, Steve, that we are more open arms than the people in UK are, that we're more welcoming?
No, I think that it's not that we're welcoming. I think that once people get here, that they buy into what it means to be an American citizen. Of course, there may be exceptions, but generally speaking, I think there's a stronger sense of a melting pot where different cultures, wherever they retain their differences, but also buy into the idea of America.
Let's hope so.
Secondly, we had 9/11, and after that there was a good, thorough review of security, and I think that led to some improvements. But most importantly, we've got a president now who takes this really seriously and has put some really serious people in charge, and instead of micromanaging them for political reasons, is letting the professionals do what they need to do to protect us. So I think for all those reasons, we can be much more confident about what's going on here in America.
The problem's very simple. When the courts are ruling against the president, he can have the best of intentions. But if he doesn't have that, then we're in big trouble. Anyway, Steve Hilton, listen, good luck tomorrow night. Thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Thanks so much.
All right, and joining me now, staff writer at the Washington Examiner, Tom Rogan. All right, Tom, you've been listening to this, report going on for the last couple hours. What is your take on what's going on in the UK?
Coordinated attack, I would think some measure of alignment with ISIS. And a special point here, which hasn't been noted really, is that ISIS specifically threatened ISIS official in a video in early 2016 an attack on a different market to Borough Market and Tower Bridge instead of London Bridge, but that specificity is concerning. I think it's probably contained now. I think the terrorists are dead or arrested. But a major attack that surprised a lot of people, and you see that in the response that tonight.
Well, but the good news is what we're hearing from everyone involved, Tom, is that the response was immediate. The lowering of the threat level from critical to severe, I'm sure will be subject to future criticism. And then the idea that, with less than 2 weeks ago, the suicide bomber and the Manchester terror attack, they're talking about doing a concert tomorrow night. I suspect that, if this is, what we think it may be, and we don't know for sure, we know it's terrorism, but we don't know for sure who's involved. I suspect, as just everyone else, I imagine that it's someone already known to authorities. What do they do in the UK?
What I think they will do, well, number one, I think tomorrow morning at the Cobra meeting, they will, JTAC will recommend raising the alert level to critical. You'll see the troops back on the streets again, which is an election week. On Thursday, there's a general election, so that'll be interesting. But the second point, I think, is you'll see a restoration of what are essentially called control orders, in which terrorist suspects who the government, the authorities do not believe they have enough evidentiary standard to convict in court, are positioned in a kind of probation-based environment where they are tagged with electronic ankle monitors. They have to report to the police station. I suspect legislation will come in to reinstigate that.
Okay, so Tom, what you're saying then is that for those people who may be on a list or under the watchful eye of the Cobra, MI5, you know, whoever the group is, that now of the 3,000 of the 23,000 that maybe will, you know, pass a law and maybe put a monitor on. It's too late. We're always reacting. The paradigm be changed. We need to be able to identify these people and prevent them from going out of the country and come back in. Why is the UK voting between a liberal and someone who's liberal, even more liberal? What's going on there?
Well, look, I think Theresa May on counterterrorism has been relatively tough. The issue is
no, she was Home Secretary. She wanted everybody in the place.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think if you look at actually her reputation with MI5, the Home Secretary, she had a pretty good one. But look, the functional issue here
there are
is
two different issues: a reputation with MI5 and being Home Secretary. I mean, you were talking about immigration, you know, versus. Well, go ahead.
Okay, well, so I would say we could have that, you know, debate. I would say yes, there is uncontrolled immigration clearly is a major concern. Steve Hilton is absolutely right on that point of integration. But I think the functional issue here is what Jim Mattis has been saying in terms of the war against ISIS moving from a position of attrition to annihilation. And that matters because if you see the connection point between the Paris-style attackers and Omar Mateen, the Orlando attacker, what sustains them is their belief that the black flag of ISIS is an ordained cause, that it unifies, that it gives a sense of purpose, and thus committing atrocities has moral and political value. And if you destroy the caliphate, right, if you have Sunni Arabs who fought alongside the Marines in 2006, essentially with their boot on the ISIS flag smiling in photographs, suddenly those future young men who might say this is fantastic think it's kind of a loser cause.
Well,
that matters. There's a reason this is happening now and it wasn't happening in 2011.
All right, Tom Rogan, thanks so much for being with us tonight. And back with me, conservative columnist and author Mark Steyn. All right, Mark, what we're focusing on now is the claim that, you know, we may be able to now identify these people and stop them. What's your take?
No, with respect to Tom and Steve, I think that would have been a fascinating debate to have 15 years ago. The German police say to monitor one of these guys takes 60 people.
That's right.
So that if you've got 23,000, I'm doing my math here, that would have to be something like 1.8 million people to monitor them all, which is ridiculous.
They don't have the resources to monitor them.
No, and you can't. And they have a huge security state at the moment, and all that means is that you're picking up body parts 3 times in 10 weeks. Somebody needs, and if I were running in this Thursday's election, I would be saying, look, we don't need mass immigration. If we maybe did in the 1950s and 1960s, we don't need it now. And we're in a situation where British subjects have been blown up in their own country, on their own streets, going to pop concerts, going to pubs, going to restaurants 3 times in 10 weeks. That's enough. We're having a moratorium until we gain control of the situation within our country.
Let's assume they have that moratorium. You've got 23,000 people, 3,000 that they're very focused on, and they don't have the legislative authority, and I want to try to jump from that to United States.
Right.
We don't have the authority to stop them from coming back if they're citizens.
No, and you have to be able, as has been said, a constitution is not a suicide pact. And if the constitution here means that any goat herd in Yemen who feels the urge to get on a plane and a district judge says you're not allowed to prevent that goat herd in Yemen getting on a plane, just for the purposes of comparison with these 23,000 guys, MI5 reckoned that at the height of the IRA troubles there were no more than 100 active IRA men.
Is that right?
And the British government thought, if you were just a suspect, in other words, you hadn't been convicted of anything, you hadn't been charged with anything, you hadn't been been arrested, but you were known to the authorities, and
what did they do?
And you wanted to get on a plane or a ferry to go from Belfast to Liverpool, they would stop you as a person of suspicion.
All right, so let's move on from that thought to the United States. Right. Given what we're seeing, and clearly everything seems to be moving west.
Right.
What do we do given the summer season, vacations? I mean, how do we protect our family members? And what impact do you think this will have on the application by the Justice Department to the Supreme Court taking the travel ban case?
The Supreme Court should strike down the idea that some upstart twerp district court judge can make immigration policy for a nation of 300 million. The core responsibility of government is to protect its citizens by protecting the integrity of its borders. If you're not a citizen, you're a guest here. I'm a guest here, and if the United States government wants to throw me out, the United States government is entitled to do that. No non-American has the right to come to this country. And it's perfectly reasonable to say this is a situation in which hundreds of people have been slaughtered in France, 12 people are killed at a Christmas market in Berlin, Brussels airport is a war zone. These are peculiar circumstances, and we are not having mass immigration anymore.
All right, Mark Stein. In the meantime, one update to report: the London Ambulance Service saying 20 victims in these attacks are currently being treated at 6 area hospitals. No official word on fatalities yet. But let's keep talking about all of this now with Fox News terror analyst Dr. Waleed Phares, who joins me now with reaction. Good evening, Waleed.
Good evening.
Look, what is your initial take on what you've heard in the last couple hours?
Well, judged through the fog and bureaucratic understanding, what Britain is facing off with now is a network of jihadists. That's lesson number one.
Do we know for sure it's jihadists?
Every time I've asked the question when an operation like this is happening, I say give it a few hours. Give it until ISIS would issue the press release. There's a pattern. Of course, we don't know that this cell or these individuals are jihadists per se linked to ISIS, but that's a general confrontation. In general terms, the UK is dealing with that threat. But what is important to understand is that that threat is linked to a European threat and an international one, which basically interact with Syria, Iraq, Libya. And you just asked the question, Judge, about the possibility of having similar operations or attempts for operations here in the United States. We need to start understanding that what we're dealing with is an international network, not just locals.
Okay, and how do we do it, Waleed? Look, Americans, and the one thing that, you know, having lived through 9/11, the one thing that's so important for our viewers to hear now is that you've got to have the ability to be in immediate contact with a family member if you are not with them, and set up some kind of a protocol so that we can stay in touch with our loved ones. But beyond that, what do you say to the United States, to law enforcement now? We've got the travel ban and judges striking it down. We know local law enforcement is for the most part on top of their game, but they may not know about this kind of stuff.
Law enforcement, I have interacted with them for over 25 years. All agencies, local agencies, you know, giving lectures about this jihadi threat and others.
Right.
There is a consensus, Judge, that the major problem is that the national government needs to inform and educate and mobilize the public. The public is the largest ally. See the reaction to the terrorists or the jihadists. If the individuals are educated and informed, they would react differently. I heard probably the report a few minutes ago that some in London tried to, in another location, tried to attack that attacker. That is the reaction we're going to get to. So you're going to have to get to a society that understands that we are at war, that understand how these tactics operate, and have a minimum reaction to it. That's number one. Number two, very importantly in this case, we need to take measures. Of course, we need to go faster in the downfall of ISIS in the Middle East. We need probably to have a better vetting system. And yes, we have a court system, and I'll be very happy to be part of a dialogue with these judges. The judges need to understand that the nation is at war with the jihadists, not just a criminal activity. It's a war against the jihadists.
Well, you know, when you talk about a vetting system, and I know that you were an advisor to Donald Trump, the presidential candidate, What we do know is vetting is going to be very hard when we have people coming here without a background or people coming here that we don't even know about. But even more than that, when you talk about dialogue with judges, you know, politics in this country, unfortunately, is, I think a lot of judges are forgetting precedent and ruling on politics. And that is very disturbing. But I do agree with you that local law enforcement needs to be informed by Homeland Security, by the federal agencies. And I've worked with local law enforcement for 30 years, and they need to be able to identify and recognize the threats, and they can't be seen as two separate competing agencies. Anyway, I want to thank you, Dr. Ferris, for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
All right, and joining me now, former member of Israeli counterterrorism unit, Aaron Cohen. Good evening, Aaron.
Hi, Judge.
All right, what's your take?
Well, I listened to your last guest. I agree with a lot of what he said. Here's what I think. I don't think there's a difference between a sympathist who's an Islamic radical and an organized terrorist. The goal is the same. Who cares whether or not you're connected to a much broader network? The outcome is the same, whether it's a blade jumping out in the middle of a street, whether it's a car on a bridge that 40,000 people walk, bicycle, and drive over. And so my take is the security needs to get a lot better, a lot quicker.
How do we do that,
I'm going to say it again.
How do we do it?
Well, let's start with the bridge. You know, I'm not a structural engineer, but I'm thinking you can throw some bollards up to be able to divide where the cars pass and where the passengers walk and bicycle. That's number one. Number two, put a couple uniformed officers. There's only 2 choke points on either end, and let's have some armed police presence out there. That'll act as a deterrence, which is one layer. And again, I've been saying this a long time, multi-layers. It means it would take a multi-failure event judge for a terrorist, sympathist, or hardcore organized to reach his objective. Every layer would have to fail. So that's the bridge. 2, the only thing that, this is what we've learned in Israel, and this is my old job. The only thing we learned about radical Islamists, like hardcore terrorists, doesn't matter if it's Hamas, Islamic Jihad, ISIS, it's all the same. The only thing they understand is fear. And right now they need to be more scared than we are. How do we do that? You can't protect every pipeline. You can't protect every citizen. It's impossible. You can't track 20,000 would-be, you know, jihadists like your last guest just said, because it would take 1 million people to actively put down all that surveillance. There's no resources. But what you can do and what works is you have to exact a very high price to these organizations. And that means you have to put the pressure like we are overseas. And that pressure, I believe, is forcing the terror to come back to London. London is under siege. The only way to deal with a terrorist siege is to respond with terrorism on those sympathists. And what I mean by that is everywhere they're not looking, they're being watched, and they're being grabbed, and they're being arrested, and they're being shaken down, and they're being treated like the gangsters that they are.
All right, but Aaron, hold on a second. Why is London in particular under siege? 3 attacks in less than 10 weeks. Why London?
Well, because London is a absolute has an extremely high Muslim population that sympathizes with ISIS. I believe there's a lot of very average people who sympathize with the creation of the Levant in Syria and Iraq. I think that the Quran, if I'm not mistaken, you can't change the Quran.
But we still don't know. Look, Aaron, with all due respect, and I have to say this, we still don't know who did this. I mean, I can assume, like you, who it probably is, but we don't know for sure. So, but let's assume that there are these people who are sympathizers. What do you do in a civilized society with these individuals against whom you cannot file criminal charges? What do you do?
You have to change the laws so that I can, as the leader of a counter-terror unit, approach you, Judge, and get all of the warrants that I need to be able to begin making entry on any structure that I believe is cooperating, assisting, or aiding and abetting a potential terror attack. And I need to get that warrant before I have anything other than just a little bit of cause. And so I have to, and that's the way that counterterror works. In Israel, we found that you have to treat every potential possible terror attack as a terror attack, and then start investigating backwards. Traditionally in America and in London, Scotland Yard, FBI, really great at investigating crimes, breaking them up. But with terrorism, you need the intel and the information before.
Exactly.
And you have to go off hunches. You have to go off instincts. You have to go off that endermal reaction, which raises the hair on the back of your head. And then you have to honestly have a look at all of the potential. I'm like Ariana Grande concert. I'm still going, how is a 30,000 person venue not protected, not looked at as a potential target? And then here we are asking ourselves afterwards, how is there 3 attacks in the last 20 days, 10 days, whatever it's been? The security, like, you cannot approach soft target security with a soft approach. Just because they're soft targets doesn't mean you treat it softly. So really good security mixed with aggressive policy and judges who get this thing so that these counter-terror agents can kick down doors and do what has to be done. Otherwise, at the end, we're going to be here again talking about the same thing with law enforcement reacting.
Aaron Cohen, thank you so much for being with us this evening. And I'm going to go back to Mark Stein. Listen, what Aaron Cohen was saying is absolutely correct. And that is that there has to be an aggressive police approach and there has to be intelligence sharing.
Yeah, but there also has to be. I mean, if you take the Manchester guy, the guy was a suicide bomber.
Right.
He blew himself.
What do you do about him?
He blew himself up. His sister posts a message on Facebook congratulating him on entering paradise. Now, she's not a terrorist, but nor is she a functioning city of a Western democracy. And the question is, that is the broader comfort zone in which the terrorism incubates. And so you actually have to wage war on the ideology that supports that. The idea that that you can be a terrorist and all your family know what you're up to and your family supports you and you've got friends who suspect you're up to something. That's actually the problem. There's a small number of people who self-detonate, but it's people like the sister who congratulate you on entering paradise who are actually the broader problem.
Right, and we've seen this in San Bernardino. We've seen it with the wives of some of these individuals, Omar Mateen and several of them. So, but until we get to the point, Mark, where we change the laws, and Aaron Cohen was also talking about, you know, the police, as did Dr. Ferris, and the judges. I mean, you can't take judges off the bench. We're behind the 8 ball with this.
And it's going to, but as I said, it's essentially an ideological conflict. And so indulging people, when somebody comes here, if they come to the United States, if they come to Canada, Australia, wherever, and they really want to live, 37% of Irish Muslims want to live under Sharia in Ireland. They're of no Ireland has enough problem with Catholics and Protestants. They don't need Muslims complicating
But you know, you hit a very important point, and that is, you know, the difference between someone who may be a terrorist and someone who is just practicing their religion is a belief in Sharia. And the more this starts to creep up, and Sharia law, which is totally inconsistent with the Constitution, the more we have to recognize the danger zone that we're in.
Well,
and so, go ahead.
And if you have someone like Aaron, I mean, London has more bollards than any other city. Sydney, they had somebody, these great metal posts. He was saying they need bollards, metal posts on the, I love America because no one knows what the word bollard means. That's great. I mean, these metal poles all along the sidewalk to prevent a car going up and killing people.
But they're going to find another soft target.
But you can't make apart from benefiting the bollard industry, the Australian Prime Minister, after they had one of these car killers down there, he says, oh, we need you know, you've got a choice here. You can bollard off every Ariana Grande concert, every pastry shop, every coffee shop, every aspect of life, or you can actually deal with the big question here and secure and have bollards around your national border, which will be a lot cheaper.
And then, you know, the more we look at this, we hear about crude weapons. Okay, so let's assume you got your bollard, new word for me, but then you've got the guys with the machetes, and you've got the guys with the big knives, and you've got other, they come to other crude kind of...
I was in a French village last summer, and Mohammed went crazy because 2 little girls were in bathing suits. He stabbed them with his fork. The fork he was having breakfast with, he stabbed them with. They had to be helicoptered with a punctured lung to the hospital at Grenoble.
How old were these girls?
Well, these girls were like 9 and 12.
With a fork?
With a fork. With the fork he was having breakfast with because he didn't like their bathing suits, swimsuits.
Well, that's something that I hope that we're not going to be in a situation where we have to deal with this kind of thing. But a lot of changes need to be made. It would be very interesting to see in the next week what happens with the election in the UK, what happens with the Supreme Court and the travel ban in the United States. A lot going on here, and it's just the beginning of the tourism season. All right, major terror attacks in London tonight. At least 20 people injured. No official word yet on fatalities. I'm Judge Janine Pirro. Thanks for being with us. Our coverage continues now with Trey Scott.